Paltrocast. Good morning to you, Chris. How's your day going, aside from talking to the fake news media?
Right. The faker the better. The real stuff is not interesting to me. The real
Well,
news.
we'll keep it absolutely real here. And before we
Yeah.
talk about music and the good stuff, we'll talk about the fact that Stereophonic is coming to Broadway. Like, how long
Yeah.
do you have to keep that a secret for?
No longer. We did have to keep it a secret for about a month, and it was really hard. I did tell my mother, and I told my father and his girlfriend, and I told my wife, and I told my 4-year-old. Actually, I didn't tell my 4-year-old because I don't know that it would have had any impact, but he knew that I was going to be going back to work at some point on the same show. So I had him tell my dad at a Christmas Eve meal, though, so that was pretty fun.
That's got to be a challenging part of your profession where everybody thinks that you're out of work. So they
Right.
feel bad for you, but they don't know that there's a great project ahead that you can't tell them.
Well, usually they're right. Usually, when everybody thinks you're out of work, they're right. You're out of work. There isn't some amazing project ahead of you that you just can't tell anybody about. There's just maybe some good things behind you, and then just the fog ahead of you, out of which will come something, whether it's you know a beautiful job or just a speeding semi hitting you head on. You never know.
Yeah, and in this case, it did go from off Broadway to Broadway, which is a very rare kind of thing. People say off Broadway,
Yeah.
knowing in their heads it's never going to Broadway. But the fact that they're saying the word Broadway, it lends all this credibility that shouldn't be there. You and your team actually did it.
I mean, there are a lot of things that transfer, but you're right, there are a lot of things that don't. And I think to people who off like the size Broadway, off Broadway, all has to do with the size of the contract, usually the size of the house, the size of the audience. But you're right when you talk to people who, maybe from out of town who are like, well, plays are Broadway. So when you say off Broadway, you're basically just saying it's not Broadway or it's not a big deal or it's not a good thing. When in reality, most of the exciting stuff that is off Broadway. And you're right, rarely does it go from off Broadway to Broadway because sometimes they just don't translate. Like a garage band then playing like Madison Square Garden like isn't a really healthy move, but sometimes it does. And when it does, it's really exciting. And then when we get to do a show like this one ever, it's amazing. But then when there's a response to it that is such that somebody wants to take it and show it to more people, that's really thrilling.
Well,
Um,
repeating myself and rudely interrupting you for the first of many times to come here, it's
Please.
that most of the times when the thing is Broadway bound, it's being showcased or shopped or done in another city.
Right.
being done in Chicago, San Francisco. So there's not a lot of things in Broadway that were off Broadway in New York first.
True. True. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
Stereophonic, looking forward to that. And you said April is when it's coming?
Thanks. And yeah, beginning of April, we start rehearsals in beginning of March. And so yeah, April 3rd is the first preview, and then we open near the end of April sometime, and then we're for now at least running until the end of July. If it does really well, or maybe middle of July, and if it does really well, then we'll extend. So yeah, fingers crossed. I'm just looking at my contacts here. If there's a stereophonic, I think it's stereophonicplay.com. You can get all the information and in terms of and a link to tickets and all that sort of stuff. And right now, they're selling tickets for the first couple of weeks. There are $40 tickets, there are $80 tickets, there are $120 tickets in addition to like the really pricey ones. So um,
Got it.
is Broadway is commercial theater, baby. So people are investing money and people want to make their money, and it's they're offering a really good deal for the first few weeks of the run. So it's
We will
selling
put
well. I just went on for kicks to see how it was doing. As a play that doesn't begin for 2 months. It's like it's selling really well, so it's exciting. I think word of mouth has gotten around that it's a really kick-ass play, and I agree. I'm happy that I get to be there every night. It's
Right.
very
I'm looking forward to it. We'll put the links and all that, but let's shift. And
cool.
in terms of being an interviewer or a person that does a lot of junkets, some days you have no idea who the person that you're talking about is.
Yeah.
And that's not the case when I spoke with you the first time. I knew who you were. I looked up the credits. That was great. But I just thought, okay, dude in a movie who's done TV work. Okay, fine, great.
Right.
And then we started talking, and I looked behind you and I saw the Lemmy poster and the Van Halen poster and went, whoa,
Yeah.
I only have 10 minutes to talk to this guy, but clearly we like the same things. But there's a publicist on the line, so we have to talk about the movie.
Right.
And here we are finally getting to talk about Van Halen.
It's true.
So,
I think the first thing we talked about, like maybe we introduced ourselves, and you're like, "Is that a Van Halen poster behind you?" And I said, "Yeah." And you was like, and then you dove into how you were writing this bio of Diamond Dave, and I was like, well, I no longer wanted to talk about the movie. I wanted to talk about Van Halen.
yeah, I have this bad habit of shoehorning Van Halen into most of my interviews, even when they shouldn't be there.
Right.
And, hey, you're talking to Ice-T. Now let's ask Ice-T about Van Halen. I have that bad habit that
Is
growing
that
up
a
on
bad
Howard
habit
Stern,
though? Is that a bad habit though? I bet Ice-T has feelings about Van Halen. Everybody's like, everybody
he
loves a
did.
good Van Halen reference. Yeah.
He did. And all these people have feelings. And the book that I started writing ultimately had nothing to do with what's happened in the Van Halen universe in the last month, where Diamond Dave is telling you his feelings. How up
Right.
are you on all these Diamond Dave feelings podcasts?
I don't think I know anything about. This is the first I've heard about any developments in the last month. Please share.
Oh, really? Okay. So I don't know if I'm going to break your heart
Uh,
or give you too much homework and or you're
okay.
going to go, Darren, you're too serious about all this stuff. Okay,
Doubtful. Doubtful it's the latter. Go
okay. So Dave, in the last month, really the last 2 weeks, has been putting out podcasts where he's
ahead.
telling stories. And in the background of these stories that he's telling is like quirky music and there's sound effects and there's some production and all that. And the first one is basically talking about what a mess Eddie Van Halen was and why he got divorced
Right.
and how he basically saved him and how Alex was an alcoholic and a bully. And you go, what?
Yeah.
And then the next one is about how Eddie got divorced and moved into this LA motel hotel called the Sportsman Lodge. Did you ever get put up there?
No.
Okay. More or less roadies stay there, adult film industry people,
Yeah.
transient kind of people stay there, and Eddie moved in there. So it's a
Right.
story about Eddie moving into the Sportsman Lodge. Then the third one was about Wolfgang being a brat,
Uh,
which I've debunked some of this information. And then
right.
this last one is really harsh on Wolfgang and Wolfgang and Alex. So
Yeah.
basically, he thinks that he's doing this jovial tone, and all
Right.
the people like me and Greg Renoff and Van Halen News Desk are going, this is a bad look. What are you doing? So
Right.
we've got 80 to 90% of the fan base going, this is horrifying, Dave. What are you doing? And 10 to 20% going, you sensitive snowflakes, you can't take a joke.
Right.
So
See,
none of this has come to your radar.
no, none of it's come to my radar, but now, I mean, none of it strikes me as surprising, and all of it strikes me as like, A, quite possibly, if not definitively true, and B, totally Diamond Dave's impressions and his feelings. And this from somebody who is a huge personality, has lots of opinions, is a very public persona, and notably and historically clashed with every single one of his bandmates, like in perpetuity, like from the beginning, from before they were playing backyard parties in Pasadena. Like he was a rich kid with a big attitude and a speaker and some mics, which is why he was maybe allowed to be in the band in the first place. But like none of this stuff, I don't know, none of that seems surprising to me. None of it seems like there's no way that that could be true. I'm sure everything was, lavender and lollipops all the way, and now he's just old and bitter. Like all of those guys, they did drink too much. They did have egos. They did clash, and there was a lot of conflict. I would venture to say I was a brat when I was in middle school. I bet Wolfgang Van Halen, the son of Eddie Van Halen, growing up the way that he did in Hollywood, I bet there were moments when he was a total fucking brat. Is he now? I have no idea. And I would put money on the fact that he's not. But like, especially coming from David Lee Roth, where there are times when, you know, Eddie Van Halen, his like nemesis and his savior, and one of the most brilliant guitar players and artists of all time, where there are times when his young kid got on his nerves? Probably. I don't know. Should he be spilling any of this stuff in a podcast? Like, I'm not on any social media. I don't kind of profess that my opinions are worth the paper they're written on, or the, you know, the wavelengths that they're transmitted on. So but somebody like him clearly likes to talk, and he's got a lot of opinions and a lot of experience, and in my mind is a fucking genius, and a damaged, wounded genius. But I also think that that's redundant, that in order to be the kind of person he is, he has to have gone through a whole lot of shit, and he's probably still going through a whole lot of shit. And this is what he's putting out, and maybe it's a shame, but I don't necessarily, I don't necessarily agree or disagree with it, but none of it surprises me. And a lot of it, I would imagine, you can just run through the filter of like, this is Diamond Dave's opinion. And if you know anything about him, you know that he's got a lot of opinions and he talks a lot, you know? And
So
like, I would
yeah,
credit him for the whole, none of us would know. I will go out on the record right now as saying, none of us would know Eddie Van Halen and Alex Van Halen and Van Halen in the way that we know them now, were it not for David Lee Roth, because he's the one who kind of
I'm
got them
with you
out of their shells
100%.
and sold
Yes.
them and pushed them. It was like, I'm not playing Black Sabbath tunes anymore. I'm not playing covers. Like, yeah, we're a party band, but let's write our own music and let's play something that the girls like to dance to. And then they became, you know, they became bigger and more popular for other reasons besides like the coolest kids at the basement party and, you know, Redondo. Like, who fucking cares about those guys? You know, I think David Lee Roth dragged those guys into the spotlight, and like, the rest is history. So like, without him, there wouldn't be this whole phenomenon that you and I and gajillions of other people have gone crazy about since the late 70s, you know? So I don't know. I think that guy can say whatever he wants. He's not my buddy. I don't, in the sense that I don't know him at all. We've never hung out, so I don't like, kind of, whatever his personality is. That's what his personality is, and I'm so grateful to him and all of those guys for having done what they've done over the last 50 years. So,
Hmm.
you know,
Well, you know, this is a compliment towards Mr. Chris Stack right here. And as a person who obviously can act and knows about character work and character development, what do you make of the fact that the Diamond Dave of the mid 80s through early 90s never broke character publicly? He
right,
always kept a big smile even when he hated your guts. He could skate
right,
through that. And then the Diamond Dave of today is just kind of this cranky old man who doesn't care. That the Diamond Dave character has evolved to, yes, he's going to say what he wants, and it does not have to be happy, and he
right,
doesn't care about offending anyone, but he still thinks he's Diamond Dave.
right. It's an interesting question. I mean, he is indeed the one and only. And, you know, we all evolve as we age. Um, and it's not to me to kind of lay a judgment on how he's doing it. I haven't listened to what he said, so I can't um, say firsthand, like, whether it's nasty or mean or cranky or curmudgeonly or just
I'll
like,
wait for you to listen and then you to text
uh,
me, dude, you're right, this is bad.
yeah, or if it's just true, but you also are kind of like, ah, dude, like, let it go. Like, everybody knows, like Eddie and I feel like they all cops to being alcoholics and, you know, kind of mad scientists with huge egos, like a long time ago. I mean, none of that seems horribly shocking to me. Um, I feel like when they split up in the 80s, they were trash talking each other a lot.
Yeah,
Sam and Dave have trash talked each other a lot. Like Eddie trash talked Michael Anthony of all people.
of
Like
all people.
they trash talk everybody. And like Eddie, those guys trash talk everybody who has kind of come and gone from their lives, you know? And I think that it has to do with whatever mad genius kind of makes up their persona. Like it doesn't mean that you're some kind of angel, you know? It just means like you are afflicted. You have a lot of pain. You have a lot of um you have a lot to say, and you have a lot, and you have different ways of saying it. You know, Eddie feels like said things with his instrument, and
Hmm.
as a lot of musicians do. And then I'm not interested in when they come out and they start trash talking each other. I just think it's unnecessary and silly. But like, who cares what I think, really? I mean, if you
I
feel
care, and that's why I'm speaking with you
yeah,
today.
yeah, you
So,
care, and that's why you're speaking with me. But like, if I were to be interviewed, if I were to be interviewed by some publication, and I would feel compelled to trash talk, you know, somebody who I'd worked with, I would imagine that I would be made of different stuff. Like I would have gone through something very specific with that other person,
mhm.
and I would be in a very specific place that I, Christak, have never been to. I mean, I imagine like those dudes going through what they went through as really young kids playing in high school gyms and then backyard parties and then like along the LA strip for so long, and then getting their demo recorded by Gene Simmons and then having that go nowhere, and then getting into the studio to record their first album, and all of a sudden exploding and touring with Journey and Sabbath, and then having their own tours and being, and then and this is over the course of like 6 years
Yeah,
from Van Halen 1 to 1984, like becoming the biggest touring act, the highest paid band of all time for a live performance at the, what was it, the US Festival
us
or
festival.
something.
Yeah,
Like that's a lot to go through, and um they're all young,
yeah,
they're all creative,
way under
they're
30.
all boozing and partying, and people are telling them things that they want to hear, and they're going through things that most people in life have no idea about. I would think that that would lend itself to lots of conflict, especially when you have conflict kind of to begin with in terms of different personalities. And so to come through all that and become so successful, but then also have so much anger or insecurity or, uh, I mean, clearly love for these other people, where you feel compelled to keep dragging them through the mud. I mean, it's an incredible story, and it's an incredible kind of relationship. And this is not a shameless plug, but like it's kind of what Stereophonic is about. Like it's about people, creative people who reach a level of success very quickly and then have to do more with it while their personal relationships are having struggles of their own, and like
Mhm.
trying to figure out how to be together in the same room, and then trying to figure out how to make something together, and then trying to make something that's incredibly personal and unique, um, but for the world to have, and all the attendant vices that come with it, aka like money and drugs and just whatever fame is and all that sort of stuff. Like I can't profess to know what that is, but I bet it's intense, and a lot of bands have gone through it. Like Van Halen, The Clash are a huge fan or a huge favorite of mine, and they did 5 albums, 6 albums that were massive before they totally imploded too. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that
Before
happens.
Cut the Crap happened.
Yeah, and then that was after then Joe and Paul Simonon were the only original
Yeah,
dudes left in the band by that point, and it was just like yikes. And then Joe Strummer had to run off to Granada, Spain, and kind of hide out and recoup and lick his wounds for a while, and I mean, I can't imagine what that's like. But these guys have been, I mean, they haven't been in a band together for, I mean, 1984 came out 40 years ago in January. So like by 1985 they weren't a band. So like they have a it's been a long time since the 1980s, since the peak of their fame, since the peak of their powers, as it were. Like,
Well, putting you on the spot here, this fourth
yeah,
Roth podcast, he's talking crap about a different kind of truth from the early, do you call it the aughts, the 2010s decade,
sure.
whatever you call it. I think it's a great album.
Me
Wolfgang
too.
thinks it's a great album.
Me too.
You too.
Me too. But see, I feel like that's kind of their jam. It's like, oh, you think it's good? Well, then I think it sucks. But no, you don't, because you put your stamp on it too. Like you were there, you made it, you put yourself out there and you released it and you toured behind it and you talked about it and you're like, this is great. But then they're like, oh no, you think it's great? Well, I think it sucks because Wolfgang's a brat and Eddie was a recovered alcoholic and like shut up. At a certain point, just shut up, which is why I don't listen to it, like and also there are um, there's certain places like Mark Maron had an amazing interview with Diamond Dave that but Mark Maron has a certain kind of gift for gab that I relate to and I appreciate more than like a Joe Rogan, or definitely more than David Lee Roth on his own, just
Oh yeah, the
spinning.
filter.
I don't really have any interest in that, listening to
Oh,
that.
okay, I have to rudely interrupt you here. You called that a great interview because Mark Maron was one of the only times when David Lee Roth is doing his Rothisms in an interview. He's like, when you blah 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 blah, like he says a nonsensical reference. It's, when you drive down the road and you wave at that pretty girl, and Maron goes, not really.
Yeah.
That was one of the only times I've ever heard someone not agree with Roth in a
Yeah.
statement.
Yeah.
And
And Roth kind of like, I don't remember that specifically, but he seemed very grounded. As much as a dude like that could be grounded in an interview or just in life, like he seemed really like, I mean, he is incredibly smart. He's incredibly
yes,
well read and God knows creative. And like the man can talk and access references that 99% of us can't. And I feel like that's why I loved him being interviewed by Mark Maron, is because Mark Maron was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. As opposed to somebody just letting him off the leash and
yeah.
running around in circles. Like the Joe Rogan interview, like I can't listen to that for more than 5 minutes. I all of a sudden I feel like it's absolute chaos. I don't know where I am. I don't know, and I don't need to know where this is going, but I need to know that it's like tethered to the earth somewhere. You know? And
Well, what was your gateway as a Van Halen fan? I'm going to assume it was just, well, it was on the radio and MTV.
it was Diver Down, and I remember going to swim practice after school. I was a competitive swimmer, and like from age 10 to 14 maybe. And my mom would pick me up from school, and then we would pick up this other guy on my team. And I remember it must have been a winter day, probably like January or February of maybe 1984. So I would have been 10.
Magical
Um,
year right
and
there.
I
Got it.
knew, yeah, and I knew about, well, and then so the thing that I remember is sitting in the middle of the backseat of my mom's car, my buddy Derek, who was sitting next to me, and the windows were kind of fogged, and he drew a flying VH in the fog, in the steam on the windows, and I was like, "What is that?" And he's like, "Van Halen," and I was like, "Oh, like." And I knew, like, Pretty Woman or whatever the single was. Maybe it was Dancing in the Streets and Pretty Woman, like whatever the singles from Diver Down was. And then like 1984 had just come out, so Jump was everywhere, and that was like, oh, that's who that is. Okay. And then I just kind of, I think because Derek liked them and drew the thing, and I was really drawn to I mean, it's iconic, the logo. Then I just kind of, then I dove in, and then I don't remember the kind of the develop how it developed from there, but I fell hard and
As a
fast within, yeah,
swimmer,
within weeks was drawing the flying VH on on my textbooks, on the bathroom walls, like on everything. I still
so
do
it's
it.
coincidence, the swimming and the diver part.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
So did you follow them straight when they split with Dave? Were you into both Van Halen and Dave, or did you have to choose sides because you're a teenager?
I wanted to um, stay with Van Halen. I really wanted to. And I got 5150. I really liked it. It was my first concert. But then my second concert was Eat 'em and Smile.
Wow.
And I remember that summer going to camp, and there was a camp counselor who loved Van Halen too, and he's like, "What do you think, like David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar?" And I really like kind of really wanting it to be true. It was like, "No, it's better now. Like Van Halen is better now." And he was like, "Yeah, yeah, I like the old. I like Dave." And I was like, yeah, you're right. You're right. Damn it, I do too. And that's not to say that Van Halen is, got worse or whatever. It just was not. It went from being my speed to not being my speed. And and then I still like, I hung in for OU 812, but a little less than 5150. And like, then from then on, the more I listened to 5150, the less I was like, there's less to explore in it. There's less, there's less depth to it. There's less depth to there's less catharsis to it for me. Catharsis in music is really important for me. And I still can listen to the first six Van Halen records and just get completely blasted. And I don't mean any kind of, I'm sober and have been for 7 years, but like totally hyped is maybe the better expression. Like
Excited. You feel
excited,
it. Yeah.
moved, thrilled. I laugh.
Yeah.
Like the lyrics are fucking hysterical. Some of like Eddie's guitar acrobatics, like they still make my jaw hit the floor. And I I also think it has to do with when I was listening to it. Like I found all this stuff and it just kind of opened my eyes up and my ears up to the greater possibilities of the world. Like this was kind of like what? Like I'd been listening to other things, top 40 radio. And then here's a top 40 album that was 1984 and diverted down, but then I went backwards and listened to the rest of it. It's like, well, what is this stuff? And then I learned the hits like, Run with the Devil and Jamie's Crying and forget Eruption. I mean, that's just insane. But then my personal favorite, Women and Children First, is my personal favorite. And I think this might be a whole interview in and of itself, but Fools is the quintessential Van Halen song. The
Hmm.
quintessential. It has all of the things that I love about Van Halen in one song. And
I'm
so that kind of stuff. And like most people don't, like when you think of Van Halen, like that's not the first song that comes to mind.
Yeah,
But
Panama. Yeah.
it's the most in my mind and in my heart, it is Van Halen, my favorite parts of Van Halen crystallized into one song.
Wow.
But so I don't remember why I started talking about all of that, but basically,
When
uh,
it comes to did you follow Dave,
oh,
follow Van Halen, or
right.
follow both?
I followed old Van Halen, and I did not listen to OU 812 that much, and I listened to 5150 a lot. I listened to Eat 'em and Smile a lot, but that was it. I didn't listen to the rest of Dave's solo stuff. I didn't listen to the rest of Van Halen stuff. I would like when a new Van Halen record would come out, I would hear the hits on the radio, and I maybe would listen to somebody's copy. I never bought another one. Um, when Van Halen 3 came out, I don't think I even listened to it. I didn't listen to it for years. I didn't listen to it all the way through until that the interview book with it's like an Eddie bio told through like all the interviews. I think it's called Eruption maybe.
Oh, the Brad Tolinsky, Chris Gill book. Yes.
I can't remember who, but yeah, it's fucking awesome. Like
Yeah.
just so like I will read anything about that band. Like I love it all. But Van Halen Rising about the beginnings
Greg Renoff, great
and then
author.
I mean it's phenomenal. One of my
Yeah.
favorite music bios of all time. And then that Eruption really I feel like got there was something, there was a lot of new stuff about Eddie, and Eddie as an artist and maybe as a person and as a father and as a man that I learned from that book. And but how he talked about that was kind of the quintessential Eddie. Like, this was me. That album was me. And when people didn't respond well to it, he took it really hard. And that broke my fucking heart. And I went and I listened to it and I struggled to get through it, but I loved it because I was like, okay, this is the most personally expressive and most vulnerable album that Eddie Van Halen believes that he made of all of the amazing stuff. And did not do well at all.
No.
It did, and by far. And like, that to me is incredibly moving. And I was just listening to it on the way home to come and talk to you. And like, do I like it? No. Am I moved by it? Yes. But that was, maybe the third time that I've dug into that. So I didn't listen to any more of the Hagar stuff. I didn't listen to any more of the solo. Like the occasional Dave single, like, the Sensible Shoes or Soul Kitchen. I always like that cover. But then like, they need the counterbalance,
Yes, too
One
much
another.
Dave is too much Dave. Too much Eddie's too much Eddie. So
And
that is why
who yeah,
to like put words in your mouth here. If Van Halen 3 had Dave, the songs would have been a lot shorter. He might have force fed a cover or two in there, but there would have been a good single. And
yeah,
if you look at the album that had Sensible Shoes on it, it's way too much Dave. So you have
way
all
too.
these like narrative songs, storytelling songs that are
Yeah,
nonsense.
yeah.
And Jason Becker, of course, was going through his illness, but Jason Becker didn't co-write every song on that album. He co-wrote like two or three.
Is that
And
the
Jason Becker could have been that Eddie Van Halen for him. So
oh, right.
you
Is he
have
the
your two
guitar player? He was the guitar player on the DLR album? Okay.
on that album. A Little Ain't Enough.
Oh,
He was
right. Okay.
the guitar player who's supposed to be his next Eddie after Steve Vai had
Right.
flown the coop.
Right.
Steve Vai helped reel him in. Maybe not enough, but he helped reel him in. And
Yeah.
when Dave doesn't have that co-pilot, it's not great. When Eddie doesn't have that co-pilot, it's not that great.
I see if for my money, Sammy Hagar didn't reel him in enough either. Or Eddie didn't put his foot down enough with Sammy. Like I apparently for all I've heard, like Sammy is a lovely dude. Like that's fine. He's not we've never met. He's not my buddy. I'm not trash talking him.
Yeah,
His
yeah.
like all of his stuff from Montrose through fucking Chickenfoot, just boo. No, like none of it. It's rock candy. Come on, dude.
I don't.
The
Yeah,
answer
I
is
don't.
like, why can't this be love? Because it's fucking Van Halen, dude. That's why it can't be love. Like somebody don't bring that shit in here. But you do, and Eddie likes it, and it's enormous. So like, okay, great. Via con Dios. I'm just not interested. Like, obviously they had multi-platinum albums for the rest of their career until Van Halen 3. So like a lot of people like it. That's great. It's not my thing. It does not move me. It has no catharsis. It has no poetry. Um, a lot of it just like it hit the nail on the head. Like there's no, and so in that vein, then like Eddie and Sam, like they didn't keep each other in check in any way that I'm interested in.
Mhm.
Though I'd listen to Eddie, play guitar on anything, like whether it's Beat It, obviously, or like there's a crazy video of him playing, is it The Sounds of Silence with Paul Simon at a bridge school benefit where he's
He's
clearly
noodling.
hammered. He's hammered. And Paul Simon is like, what is happening? I'm like, that's Eddie Van Halen playing guitar on your song. And your song is amazing. And that's Eddie Van Halen playing on it. Is it a good fit? I don't think so, but
No.
that's awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah,
you know. And
but
so like
that's a case of
but Dave and Alex and Michael and Eddie, like that's the thing. That's the band. And Ted Templeman, maybe, clearly, because like if you listen to Van Halen 0 and Van Halen 1, like the demos are cool, but it's not nearly the album that Van Halen 1 is. So Ted Templeman was needed there to do his thing too, to make that magic happen. So,
And Don Landy,
and Don Landy, yes, of course, yes, and
who
maybe
thanks
Paul Monk too. Like I don't fucking know. I don't understand exactly what I've read his book, and I still, I mean, he did a lot of the business stuff, and I know that like the t-shirt stuff and the pirating and the merchandising and all that stuff, like very cool. But in terms of the creativity, the music, like yeah, those guys together, they all needed one another. And it's interesting because once one person was different, for me, it all fell apart. Wasn't interested, and I didn't wasn't like coming to it predetermined to not like it. Like I really, like I said, I really wanted the Hagar era of Van Halen to be better, to be moving forward. And I just like I told myself it was, and I got really into it. And like Summer Nights, I remember being like, yes, this song. But then like, no, no, it just 5150 is still a cool song. I have a buddy who I grew up with who every time we're at a store or a bar or wherever and the tab comes up 5150, like we take a picture of it and send it to each other. Like, great. I love it. But like, because it's Eddie Van Halen and it's Alex. I mean, you know, I'm a drummer. I've played drums since I was in middle school. Alex was my first guy, you know. And all of them, and Michael Anthony, like I think he gets a bad rap, but like somebody in that band has to get a bad rap, and it's gonna be him. Sorry, but like clearly
beat
once
the
he's
bass
gone,
player.
yeah, and once he's gone, like no, I'm not as interested either. Like Wolfgang Van Halen, ridiculously talented dude, son of Eddie, nephew of Alex. Like I I love Michael Anthony. Sorry, it's those four dudes. Those are the guys I'm interested in. Paltrocast.